Imagine looking at a mandala, a perfect circle where every line converges toward a central point. For Carl Jung, this image was not just an artistic symbol, but a spiritual map guiding us toward the whole self. The self. Have you ever felt that your ego is too small to contain your true self? That behind all the social roles, masks, and fears, there is a deeper part of you silently longing to awaken? And more importantly, have you wondered if the person you show the world each day is really all of you, or just a fragment, limited by beliefs and societal pressures? These questions lead us to the journey Jung described, the journey to find the self, where a person becomes whole, both an independent individual and deeply connected to the universe. In his early studies, Jung noticed that many people confuse the ego with the entire self. The ego, our conscious I, is the part we recognize, control, and present in daily life. It is the driver, but it is not the whole car, and certainly not the road ahead. When we live only through the ego, we are steering only a small portion of ourselves, ignoring the inner depths and unconscious energies that could lead to complete growth. People chase status, achievements, social approval, believing that this is their true self. Yet Jung emphasized that the self is a reality far beyond these surface-level limitations. The self emerges when all pieces of a person, light and shadow, hidden and revealed, start to harmonize. It is the spiritual center, where inner conflicts find balance. Jung often illustrated the self through mandalas, sacred circles appearing across cultures, from Buddhism to Native American traditions, from ancient art to contemporary dreams. The circle represents not only unity, but continuity, wholeness, and the flow of spiritual energy. Each mandala Jung studied is a living picture, where inner contradictions are arranged into harmony, creating a calm center from which the ego can expand. The journey to the self is not a straight path. It begins by recognizing the ego and understanding that it is only a part, not the whole. You can imagine the ego as a driver focused on the road ahead, but only seeing a small slice of the surroundings. When the ego pauses, stepping aside to observe and confront the shadow, the rejected parts, hidden desires, and unacknowledged feelings, the journey truly begins. Shadow is not the enemy. It reflects what has not yet been accepted. Facing the shadow is the first step for the ego to expand, allowing hidden pieces to merge into the bigger picture. Next comes the persona, the social mask that many carry unconsciously. It is the layer we wear to fit in, meet expectations, and maintain appearances. The persona helps us navigate the outer world, but fully identifying with it makes us lose touch with our true self. Recognizing and, when necessary, removing the persona is how the ego learns not to be limited. It's like removing a foggy lens so the light from the self can illuminate the entire awareness. Anima and Animus, the opposite gender elements within each person, are also crucial on the path to the self. For men, the anima represents intuition, emotion, and connection. For women, the animus represents rationality, assertiveness, and decisiveness. Jung emphasized that balancing these elements is not just about gender, but about inner harmony. When the ego learns to listen to the anima or animus, when we accept the opposing parts within ourselves, the inner picture gradually completes, opening the door for the self to emerge. Dreams, art, and sacred symbols are the language through which the self communicates. Jung spent years studying how mandalas appear in the unconscious, reflecting the mental organization and pieces needing integration. Mandalas are not limited to Western psychology. They exist in diverse cultures: Buddhist circles, Native American sacred circles, and sacred forms in Asian and European art. This shows that the self is not a personal invention, but a universal reality that transcends time and space. When we begin to recognize the self, we are no longer confined by the ego, no longer defined solely by the persona, and no longer afraid of the shadow. We learn to embrace opposing forces within, realizing that every experience, positive or negative, is part of the whole. The self is always present, but appears only when we are ready to confront, reconcile, and connect all the fragments within. In that moment of recognition, we are both independent beings and part of the vast universe. Like a mandala, every line in life converges at the center. The journey to the self is a process of harmonizing, a path where the ego transforms from a rigid driver to the entire car naturally following the wide road ahead. Entering that center, you realize that every experience, every pain, every joy contributes to a complete whole. Those who embark on this journey often find that as the ego expands, the shadow is embraced, the persona is removed, and the anima animus balanced. The external world changes in miraculous ways. Relationships deepen, empathy grows, and the sense of universal connection becomes tangible. This is when the self appears, quietly, effortlessly, yet profoundly, like the still center of a mandala. Ultimately, Jung emphasizes that the self is not a place to escape to, but an awareness that all parts of us, ego, shadow, persona, anima, animus, belong to us, waiting to be accepted and harmonized. The self is the center, the whole, a reminder that each of us can awaken and live fully. Recognizing the self means we are both ourselves and part of the universe, a complete whole that Jung spent his life exploring and illustrating. The ego, as we have begun to understand, is the conscious identity, the driver of the vehicle that carries us through life. Yet, it is only a small fragment of what we truly are. While the ego organizes daily experiences and negotiates the world around us, it is limited by perspective, habit, and the fears it holds. Jung observed that many people mistake this fragment for the whole self, believing that their thoughts, roles, and social masks constitute their entire being. This is like assuming that the steering wheel alone defines the journey of a car, ignoring the engine, the wheels, and the road stretching beyond the horizon. The self, in contrast, encompasses not just the driver, but the entire vehicle, the environment through which it moves, and the unseen paths ahead. Before we can even begin to touch the self, there is the inevitable encounter with the shadow, that hidden, often unacknowledged part of ourselves. Shadow contains what we reject, deny, or repress: envy, anger, pride, shame, and forbidden desires. It is easy to fear it, to push it away, or to pretend it does not exist. But Jung reminds us that ignoring the shadow does not make it vanish. Instead, it accumulates, influencing behavior in ways we do not consciously perceive. The journey towards self demands that we illuminate the shadow, bringing awareness to its presence without judgment. Imagine walking through a dark forest at twilight, where every rustle of leaves and every shadowy corner carries a hint of the unknown. Only by looking directly at these shadows can we navigate safely, recognizing their shape and purpose within the greater landscape of our psyche. Once the shadow is acknowledged, the process of disentangling from the persona begins. The persona is the mask we wear to adapt to society, to meet expectations, to hide vulnerability, and to gain approval. It is not inherently negative. It serves an essential function in social life, just as a protective shell serves a turtle. Yet when over-identified with the persona, a person loses touch with inner truth. Jung likened the persona to a costume, useful for specific scenes, but never the actor's essence. The challenge is to understand its limits, to appreciate its utility without letting it define the entirety of who we are. The release of the persona is not a single act, but a gradual peeling back, a careful unveiling that allows the ego to meet the other layers of the psyche, the shadow, the inner opposites, and ultimately, the self. Then comes the encounter with the anima or animus, the counterpart within that balances our consciousness. For men, the anima embodies intuition, feeling, and receptivity. For women, the animus embodies rationality, assertiveness, and strength. Jung's insight here is profound. These elements are not confined to gender, but represent the completeness of human potential. A man who ignores his anima risks becoming rigid, overly logical, and disconnected from emotional wisdom. A woman who suppresses her animus may deny the decisiveness and assertiveness that enable full agency. Integration is the key, listening to the inner voice of these counterparts, harmonizing opposites, and allowing dialogue within oneself. This internal conversation creates the conditions for the self to emerge, a subtle but powerful alignment of the conscious and unconscious forces. Symbols and dreams provide guidance on this journey. Jung discovered that certain images, often circular, geometric, or repetitive, frequently appeared in patients' dreams as representations of the self. Mandalas are the most prominent of these. Concentric circles, intricate patterns, radiant centers. Across cultures, these symbols recur, suggesting a universal language of the psyche. A Native American medicine wheel, a Buddhist sand mandala, and even the alchemical circles of European mysticism all point to the same principle: wholeness, unity, and a center that holds all opposites together. Observing or creating mandalas can help a person visualize integration, offering a mirror for the psyche where fragmentation becomes visible and reconcilable. The self is, in many ways, the harmony of multiplicity. It is where the ego can exist without dominating, where the shadow is recognized without fear, where the persona is acknowledged without over-identification, and where the anima or animus is embraced without conflict. It is the central point around which all psychological forces rotate, like planets orbiting a sun, creating a dynamic balance that is both stable and flexible. The vehicle of consciousness moves smoothly, aware of the road, aware of the terrain, and fully inhabiting the experience of life. Jung emphasized that self-realization is not instant. It is a process of gradual awakening, sometimes uncomfortable, often surprising. Each encounter with a shadow aspect, each moment of honesty with the persona, each listening to the inner opposite, is a step toward wholeness. Dreams, art, meditation, and reflective practice serve as companions on this path, offering glimpses of what the psyche longs to integrate. Patience and presence are crucial, for the self does not emerge through force or desire alone, but through consistent, mindful engagement with the depths of one's own being. Ultimately, when the self begins to manifest, life transforms. Relationships deepen, choices align more closely with authentic values, and the sense of purpose extends beyond the personal ego. We experience both individuality and connection simultaneously, feeling ourselves as a complete entity and as part of the vast web of existence. Like the central point of a mandala, the self radiates coherence and calm, integrating all tensions into a balanced whole. This is the reward of the journey. To move from fragmented living to a life guided by inner wholeness, clarity, and a profound sense of unity with the universe. The journey from ego to self is rarely linear. Just as a traveler may encounter detours and crossroads, the psyche often confronts contradictions, resistances, and confusions. In these moments, the ego struggles, attempting to assert control over what is inherently larger than itself. The self, however, does not demand submission. It invites dialogue, balance, and awareness. Jung often illustrated this with the image of a wheel within a circle, the spokes representing the ego, shadow, persona, and inner opposites, all converging toward the center, where the self rests. The central hub is calm, unshaken by the movement of the outer parts, yet it is intimately aware of each rotation. It is not separate from life's experiences. Rather, it contains them, interprets them, and harmonizes their tensions. Understanding the shadow is a particularly pivotal step. People frequently project unwanted traits onto others, unconsciously blaming external circumstances for internal disquiet. The shadow may appear as jealousy, irritability, or even fascination with behaviors one outwardly condemns. Jung observed that this projection is a protective mechanism, a way for the ego to maintain a coherent self-image while avoiding discomfort. Yet, the paradox is clear. Until the shadow is recognized and integrated, it exerts influence without consent, guiding decisions, triggering emotional reactions, and often leading to patterns of self-sabotage. To meet the shadow is to accept that the dark elements of the psyche are not enemies, but parts of a whole waiting for acknowledgement. The persona, like the shadow, demands reflection. In daily life, we wear countless masks: the professional mask, the parent mask, the friend mask, the mask of competence or sociability. Each is functional, even necessary, yet each has the potential to obscure inner authenticity if overused. Jung likened the persona to a theater costume, effective in role-playing, but illusory if mistaken for reality. Individuals may feel safe behind these masks, but over-reliance results in alienation from deeper self-knowledge. Awareness arises when we consciously differentiate between the face we show and the consciousness that experiences the world through that face. Only then can the ego begin to act as a bridge rather than a gatekeeper. Integration of anima or animus follows naturally after engagement with shadow and persona. The inner feminine in men and the inner masculine in women are not simply archetypes. They are vital aspects of human psychological balance. Jung emphasized that neglecting these inner opposites creates inner tension, disorientation, and emotional imbalance. The process of recognizing anima or animus often occurs through dreams, active imagination, or symbolic creativity, revealing a voice or presence that challenges habitual patterns. Engaging with this inner guide is transformative. It softens rigidity, encourages empathy, strengthens discernment, and ultimately facilitates the alignment of conscious intention with deeper, unconscious wisdom. Dreams, symbols, and artistic expression are windows into the self. Jung observed that people drawn to creating mandalas, writing poetry, or engaging in contemplative arts often unconsciously communicate their movement toward wholeness. The circular forms, symmetrical designs, and repetitive patterns found in such creations echo the architecture of the psyche itself, reflecting both integration and balance. Each layer of the circle represents a psychological component: light and dark, masculine and feminine, known and unknown, united by the central axis, the self. The act of engaging with these symbols does more than inspire aesthetic appreciation. It nurtures psychological cohesion, bringing fragmented parts into conscious recognition and connection. The self is not static. It is dynamic, responsive, and deeply relational. In relationships, it manifests as the capacity to hold complexity, to engage authentically without losing one's identity, and to perceive the humanity of others without projection or distortion. In decisions, it surfaces as discernment informed by both instinct and reason, creativity and analysis. In moments of reflection, it offers clarity, a recognition that inner multiplicity is not chaos, but a carefully orchestrated system in which all parts have value. The self transforms life from a fragmented series of reactions into a coherent narrative, where challenges are not threats, but invitations to deeper understanding. A key insight from Jung is that self-realization is neither moralistic nor prescriptive. It does not demand perfection, nor does it favor certain traits over others. It simply requires presence, curiosity, and courage. The ego may resist this call, clinging to familiar patterns, identities, or defenses. The shadow may rise, bringing fear or guilt. The persona may threaten to dominate, insisting on performance. The inner opposites may challenge assumptions, creating discomfort. Yet all of these are opportunities, tests on the path to wholeness. With each encounter, the individual learns, adjusts, and moves closer to embodying the self. When self emerges, the experience is both grounding and expansive. One feels centered, as if perched at the hub of a vast wheel, aware of all spokes spinning around, yet unshaken. Simultaneously, there is an expansive sense of connection to other people, to nature, to the cosmos itself. Life feels less like a series of isolated events and more like a continuous flow, orchestrated by an inner compass that is steady yet flexible. Choices carry more clarity, emotional responses gain depth, and creativity flourishes. The self allows one to act from authenticity, to respond rather than react, and to navigate the complexities of existence with equanimity and insight. The mandala, then, is more than a symbol. It is a mirror reflecting the potential of human consciousness, a blueprint for integration, a visual guide toward the center. Each line, each pattern, each circle is an invitation to explore inner territory, to witness the interplay of conscious and unconscious forces, and to recognize that wholeness is not an endpoint, but a living, breathing state of being. In practical terms, moments of stillness, reflection, and creative engagement with symbols bring glimpses of this self, nudging the psyche toward balance and coherence. Ultimately, the journey from ego to self is a lifelong practice. It is a navigation of light and dark, mask and authenticity, rejection and acceptance, logic and intuition. It is a commitment to exploring the unknown within, to embracing contradictions, and to harmonizing multiplicity. Through shadow work, persona differentiation, anima, animus integration, and symbolic engagement, individuals gradually awaken to the fullness of who they are. They become not merely drivers of a car, but aware of the vehicle, the road, and the landscape itself. The self is the totality of experience, the union of fragments, and the conscious embodiment of wholeness. The path to encountering the self is seldom comfortable, for it requires meeting the parts of ourselves that we often avoid. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast forest, dense with shadows, uncertain of the terrain ahead. This forest is the shadow, the unacknowledged, the feared, the repressed. Each step forward may bring the shiver of recognition, a trait you dislike in others, a recurring pattern in your life, a buried emotion long ignored. Jung emphasized that the shadow is not punishment, nor a moral indictment. It is a guide, a mirror reflecting what remains unseen. To journey through it is to illuminate the inner world, to reclaim what has been projected, and to recognize that what you have feared most is inextricably part of you. The ego, in this metaphorical journey, functions as a cautious companion. It seeks safety, prefers familiar trails, and measures every step against prior knowledge. Yet, if the ego dominates entirely, the journey becomes stagnant. Exploration is replaced by avoidance. curiosity by judgment. Jung suggested that the ego must learn its role, neither the totality of the self nor the final authority. It is the conscious hand steering, but the self is the horizon, the larger framework giving direction, meaning, and coherence to the journey. Recognizing this distinction is essential, for without it, individuals mistake temporary comfort for genuine wholeness, confusing control with completeness. The persona, meanwhile, acts like a costume donned to navigate the social environment. Its utility is clear. It smooths interactions, signals competence, and protects vulnerability. Yet over-reliance on the persona creates distance between the conscious self and the deeper psyche. In Jungian terms, the persona can obscure recognition of the self, turning life into a performance where authenticity is deferred. To awaken, one must peel back layers, to distinguish between the mask worn for the world and the authentic inner voice seeking expression. The tension between persona and self is not adversarial. It is a dialogue, a negotiation between appearance and essence, adaptation and integrity. As one delves deeper, the inner opposites emerge. Anima within men, animus within women. These archetypal forces are often subtle at first. A fleeting intuition, a sudden emotional insight, a dream that feels charged with meaning. Engaging with these inner opposites demands courage, for they reveal not only untapped potential, but also unresolved conflicts. A man may encounter the anima as a figure of intuition, empathy, or creative inspiration, challenging habitual rationality. A woman may encounter the animus as a source of assertiveness, analytical clarity, or boundary setting, challenging habitual accommodation. Integrating these forces does not mean erasing difference. It means allowing inner diversity to enrich the whole, fostering psychological flexibility and depth. The self gradually emerges as the orchestration of these layers. The shadow, persona, and inner opposites are not discarded. They are embraced, harmonized, and oriented toward the center. The mandala, again, serves as a symbolic map. Concentric rings representing different facets of the psyche, each with its rhythm, color, and form, converging toward a luminous center. In this center, the self resides, aware, expansive, and simultaneously anchored. Life is no longer merely a sequence of reactions to external events. It is a continuous interplay of inner awareness and outward engagement, where choices are informed by insight rather than compulsion. Integration of the self transforms perception of relationships. Patterns of projection diminish. Empathy deepens. Communication gains clarity. Conflicts that once triggered defensiveness now invite reflection. The individual begins to see that what they have feared in others is often a shadow within themselves, and what they admire or envy reflects latent qualities seeking expression. Jung believed that through this relational mirroring, the self expands beyond personal boundaries, connecting to a larger collective psychic reality. The shared unconscious where archetypal images circulate across humanity and history. The journey towards self is also a journey of creativity and symbolic expression. Dreams, art, ritual, and contemplation are vehicles through which unconscious material communicates its presence. A dream may present a labyrinth, a tower, or a circle, signaling both challenge and opportunity. Engaging with these symbols through reflection, journaling, or active imagination provides a bridge between unconscious insight and conscious understanding. The self is not imposed. It is revealed gradually, like sunlight breaking through the canopy, illuminating hidden aspects and integrating disparate elements into a coherent whole. Yet, the emergence of the self is not a single event. It is a dynamic process, evolving throughout life. Each encounter with the shadow, each unmasking of the persona, Each engagement with the inner opposite is a step forward. The self requires patience, mindfulness, and willingness to face discomfort. It cannot be forced, claimed, or achieved through sheer will alone. It is cultivated through experience, reflection, and conscious integration. Jung's insights remind us that the psyche has its own wisdom. It orchestrates encounters, symbols, and conflicts to guide the individual toward balance and wholeness. In moments when the self is glimpsed, life feels aligned. Decisions carry an intuitive resonance. Emotions, while complex, are coherent. Creativity flows without obstruction. The individual no longer feels fragmented or at odds with life's rhythms. There is an embodied sense of completeness, a recognition that personal identity and universal connection are not mutually exclusive. Like a mandala, every facet, every layer, every contradiction is acknowledged and harmonized, and the circle becomes a living expression of integrated consciousness. The self is both foundation and horizon. It grounds the individual in reality, yet it expands perception beyond ordinary limits. It unifies the conscious and unconscious, the personal and collective, the temporal and eternal. The journey through shadow, persona, and anima animus prepares the psyche to receive this integration, and as one moves through life with the self, every experience, joy, sorrow, challenge, or triumph, becomes part of a larger, coherent narrative, each moment contributing to a continually unfolding awareness of wholeness. The human mind, in its daily routines, often mistakes activity for progress, movement for growth. Yet Carl Jung insisted that the path to the self is subtle, quiet, and deeply internal. It is not marked by external accolades, social approval, or the accumulation of possessions. True awakening begins when one turns inward, confronting the currents beneath the surface of consciousness. Picture a river flowing beneath ice. Above, all appears calm, reflective, and even frozen. Yet beneath, life moves with persistent force, shaping stones, forming channels, revealing patterns invisible from above. This subterranean river is the unconscious mind, and within it, the archetype of the self waits to be recognized, understood, and integrated. Jung used the metaphor of a journey to illustrate the relationship between ego and self. The ego is the traveler, aware of the immediate path, cautious and attentive to obstacles. It navigates the familiar roads, interprets experiences through personal desires, fears, and habits. The self, in contrast, represents the totality of the landscape: the river, the forest, the mountains, the weather, and the unseen currents shaping every turn. To perceive the self, one must recognize that the ego alone cannot contain or direct it. The self encompasses the conscious mind, the unconscious, and the dynamic interplay between them, guiding the individual toward balance and harmony. Understanding this distinction is essential, for it is the first step in relinquishing the illusion that we are merely what our social roles or habitual identities suggest. The confrontation with the shadow is central to this awakening. Each shadow element, repressed anger, hidden desire, unacknowledged fear, serves as a compass toward wholeness. The ego may resist, recoiling from uncomfortable truths, but Jung urged that the only path forward is engagement, not denial. Imagine holding a mirror to a dimly lit room. The reflection reveals the contours and shapes previously invisible, and only by observing them can the room be fully illuminated. Similarly, acknowledging the shadow allows the individual to integrate these disowned aspects, transforming what once fragmented the psyche into sources of strength, insight, and authenticity. This process requires courage, patience, and repeated reflection. There are no shortcuts. The persona, with all its social utility, can both conceal and protect. It is a costume that allows us to navigate the expectations of others while shielding the vulnerabilities of the inner self. But over-identification with the persona creates distance from the self. Life becomes a performance where reactions are scripted, spontaneity is stifled, and deeper needs remain unspoken. The journey toward the self requires gentle removal of these masks, revealing not only what the world sees, but also what the inner psyche silently expresses. The interplay between persona and self is subtle. It is not destruction, but reorientation, where masks serve the conscious mind without obscuring the deeper truths beneath. Within this journey, the encounter with the inner opposites, Anima and Animus, introduces another layer of complexity and richness. These archetypal figures represent qualities that have been neglected, suppressed, or unrecognized due to societal conditioning or personal fear. For men, the anima often manifests as intuition, emotional depth, and relational insight. For women, the animus appears as assertiveness, analytical thinking, and boundary setting. Integration does not mean erasing difference or dominance, but acknowledging these qualities as essential components of a whole psyche. As these opposites harmonize, the internal landscape becomes richer, more fluid, and capable of holding contradictions without dissonance. The mandala emerges repeatedly as a symbolic representation of this process. Its concentric forms, balanced symmetry, and central focus reflect the psyche's potential for unity. Each ring represents a stage of integration: ego recognition, shadow confrontation, persona adjustment, anima, animus engagement, and finally, the cohesive self at the center. Mandalas in various cultural traditions, Tibetan sand paintings, Christian rose windows, Native American medicine wheels, echo this principle, suggesting that the journey toward wholeness transcends individual experience, tapping into a universal psychological rhythm. To observe or create a mandala is to witness the self manifest symbolically, offering a tangible guide for the mind's internal navigation. Practical engagement with this journey often begins with reflection, dream analysis, and symbolic exploration. Dreams provide access to unconscious material, presenting scenarios rich with metaphor, emotion, and archetypal resonance. Jung considered active imagination, a deliberate dialogue with dream images, fantasies, or inner figures, a powerful tool to facilitate communication between the conscious and unconscious mind. Through these practices, hidden patterns become visible, internal conflicts are negotiated, and the self gradually emerges not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived, experiential reality. The process is iterative. Awareness deepens with each encounter. Subtle shifts in perception ripple through thoughts, behaviors, and emotional responses. Integration into daily life follows naturally once awareness grows. Decisions are informed not by mere habit or external pressures, but by a broader sense of internal coherence. Relationships shift, projection diminishes, empathy increases, and personal authenticity radiates outward. The self is not a destination to be reached and left behind. It is a continuous presence, dynamically guiding choices, shaping perception, and harmonizing internal and external realities. Each challenge, joy, and encounter becomes a thread in the tapestry of wholeness, weaving the individual into both personal and collective experience. The self, therefore, is both inner compass and total landscape. The journey toward it is ongoing, marked by discovery, reconciliation, and integration. Ego, shadow, persona, anima, and animus each play crucial roles. The ego as guide, the shadow as mirror, the persona as interface, and the inner opposites as balance. Together, these elements converge symbolically in the mandala, pointing toward a cohesive center. In this unfolding process, the individual learns that wholeness is not found in escaping or eliminating parts of the psyche, but in embracing, harmonizing, and allowing them to coalesce into a living, breathing self. As the journey toward the self deepens, the contours of consciousness begin to shift in subtle yet profound ways. It is not a sudden transformation, but a gradual unfolding, like dawn slowly illuminating a landscape that had remained in shadow. Carl Jung often emphasized that the self does not emerge in isolation. It is inseparable from the dynamic interplay of the unconscious and conscious mind. Every thought, every dream, every encounter with the inner world serves as a mirror reflecting hidden dimensions of our being. To navigate this terrain, one must cultivate patience and awareness, for the self reveals itself not through force or haste, but through attentive presence and symbolic understanding. The interplay between ego and self remains central. The ego, like the conscious driver, is attuned to immediate realities, evaluating, reacting, and directing daily life. It thrives on familiarity, clarity, and control, yet it is inherently limited in scope. The self, by contrast, encompasses the total psychic landscape, including dimensions inaccessible to ordinary awareness. Jung likened this relationship to a driver and the full vehicle navigating an intricate, ever-changing terrain. The driver may know the road ahead, but only the complete vehicle and the underlying currents of the landscape determine the journey's direction and outcome. Recognizing this distinction is crucial for those who seek wholeness, for conflating the ego with the self leads to partial understanding and fragmented living. Shadow work continues to occupy a central role in this process. Hidden aspects of the psyche, those impulses, fears, and desires deemed unacceptable by the conscious mind, emerge repeatedly as challenges and reflections in life. Often these shadows appear through projections onto others, triggering emotional reactions that feel both urgent and disproportionate. Jung urged that rather than denying or suppressing these elements, one should approach them with curiosity and compassion. The shadow is not a force to be conquered. It is a teacher, providing essential information about the unacknowledged facets of the self. Through engagement, previously unconscious material is integrated, transforming inner conflict into coherence and inner fragmentation into depth. The persona, the social mask, must also be examined. While it enables functioning in society and mediates interactions, it can become a trap when mistaken for the entirety of the self. Over-identification with the persona produces a life lived on the surface, in which authentic expression is stifled and the underlying self remains obscured. Awareness of the persona's role allows for selective adaptation. One can engage socially without losing touch with inner truth. The journey toward the self requires flexibility, allowing the mask to serve the conscious mind while remaining aware of what lies beneath. The equilibrium between authenticity and adaptation is delicate, yet indispensable for the emergence of wholeness. The recognition and integration of anima and animus further deepen the process. These inner opposites, qualities traditionally associated with the opposite gender, carry essential energies necessary for balance. For a man, the anima may express intuition, empathy, and receptivity. For a woman, the animus conveys assertiveness, analytical thinking, and initiative. Engaging with these archetypes does not suppress one aspect of the self in favor of another. Instead, it invites harmony and mutual support. Their integration expands the psyche, enabling more fluid interactions with both inner and outer realities. The self emerges as a dynamic center, capable of holding contradictions, embracing complexity, and fostering profound psychological resilience. Mandalas, ever present in Jung's work, serve as powerful visual metaphors for the self. These intricate circular designs, found across cultures and spiritual traditions, symbolize the integration of disparate elements into a coherent whole. Each ring, color, and pattern represents aspects of consciousness: ego, shadow, persona, anima, animus, and their alignment toward a central point mirrors the process of psychic unification. In observing or creating a mandala, the individual externalizes internal dynamics, providing clarity and perspective on the often chaotic interplay of inner forces. The mandala becomes both map and mirror, a guide to the self and a reflection of its emerging presence within the psyche. Dreams continue to play a transformative role in this section of the journey. Within the dreamscape, the unconscious communicates through symbolism, metaphor, and narrative, revealing unresolved conflicts, latent potentials, and pathways toward integration. Jung recommended attentive reflection on dream content, encouraging dialogue with figures, images, and scenarios that arise. Active imagination, a practice of consciously engaging with dream material or inner imagery, serves as a bridge between conscious awareness and unconscious insight. Through this ongoing conversation, the self gradually becomes a living, tangible presence within the psyche, no longer an abstract ideal, but a felt reality shaping perception, thought, and action. Integration into daily life is the ultimate test of these insights. A person moving toward the self begins to act with increased coherence, guided by inner alignment rather than habit or external expectation. Relationships deepen as projection diminishes and empathy strengthens. Decisions are informed not by fear or compulsion, but by the conscious dialogue between ego and self, enriched by insights from shadow, persona, and inner opposites. The self is no longer a distant goal. It is a continuous presence, orchestrating balance and fostering meaningful engagement with the world. Each moment becomes an opportunity for reflection, choice, and authentic expression. Ultimately, the self embodies both individuality and universality. It reconciles the tension between personal identity and collective belonging, guiding the individual to a state of harmonious interconnection. The journey through ego, shadow, persona, and inner opposites culminates not in perfection, but in a lived sense of wholeness, where awareness, acceptance, and integration converge. Jung's vision of the self challenges us to embrace complexity, honor our inner depths, and recognize that wholeness arises not from exclusion or control, but from courageous engagement, understanding, and love for the totality of our being. The deeper one moves into the unfolding of the self, the more apparent it becomes that life itself mirrors the psyche's inner architecture. Events, encounters, and relationships are no longer random occurrences. They take on the quality of symbols, invitations, or challenges deliberately orchestrated by the unconscious to facilitate integration. Carl Jung often described this phenomenon as meaningful coincidence or synchronicity, a reflection of the self's guiding presence. Moments that once seemed trivial or coincidental now carry layers of significance, revealing hidden connections between inner dynamics and external realities. To the attentive observer, life becomes a living canvas upon which the self gradually paints coherence and unity, a subtle yet profound orchestration that draws the psyche toward wholeness. An essential element of this phase is the conscious engagement with the shadow in more nuanced forms. Early encounters with the shadow often appear dramatic or disruptive, exposing raw fears, suppressed desires, and unacknowledged impulses. With progress along the journey, the shadow begins to manifest in subtler ways, in recurring patterns of thought, minor irritations, or quiet resistance to change. Recognizing these subtleties requires a refined inner awareness, a willingness to witness oneself without judgment, and a dedication to dialogue with the parts of the psyche that resist illumination. The shadow, in this mature phase, is not merely a source of tension, but a repository of latent creativity, energy, and insight, ready to be integrated when met with courage and reflection. The persona, too, reveals its dual nature more clearly in this stage. Initially, it functions as a necessary interface between the individual and society, facilitating communication, social survival, and adaptation. Over-identification with the persona, however, produces a veneer that obscures the self and constrains authentic expression. In the journey toward wholeness, one learns to differentiate between the protective utility of the persona and the authentic self beneath. Interactions with the world become increasingly informed by the self rather than the mask, leading to a more fluid, responsive, and truthful engagement with others. Social behavior transforms from mere performance into intentional, conscious expression aligned with inner values, bridging the inner and outer realms in elegant harmony. Integration of anima and animus intensifies in this section, bringing profound balance to the psyche. Previously, these inner counterparts may have appeared as mysterious or disruptive energies, evoking tension, longing, or confusion. Now, through deliberate reflection and acknowledgement, they begin to function as internal allies, contributing complementary strengths and insights to conscious life. The man discovering his anima experiences deeper emotional resonance, intuitive awareness, and empathetic understanding. The woman encountering her animus gains assertive decisiveness, clarity, and purposeful action. The interplay of these opposites within the psyche fosters flexibility, resilience, and creativity, demonstrating that wholeness emerges not from suppressing difference, but from harmonizing it within the self. Symbolic imagery continues to provide guidance, with mandalas serving as profound visual anchors for understanding the self's ongoing emergence. Circular motifs, representing unity, cyclicality, and centeredness, encourage the psyche to organize its multiplicity into coherent patterns. As one observes or creates mandalas, internal tensions, fragmented impulses, and unresolved conflicts are gradually harmonized into a coherent whole. The center of the mandala, often the focal point of attention, mirrors the core of the self. A stable, integrative presence that holds all contradictions, embraces complexity, and radiates coherence throughout the entire psychic structure. Jung regarded this process not as a literal achievement, but as an experiential reality that could be cultivated through attention, reflection, and symbolic engagement. Dreams continue to illuminate the path toward integration. In this phase, dream content often becomes more intricate, weaving together multiple archetypal motifs, symbolic narratives, and figures that represent aspects of the self in dialogue with one another. By actively engaging with these dreams, through reflection, journaling, or active imagination, the dreamer nurtures the capacity to synthesize unconscious material with conscious understanding. Recurrent images of circularity, light emerging from darkness, or journeys along winding paths indicate a progressive alignment between ego and self. Dreams become both mirror and guide, reinforcing the integration of shadow aspects, the recalibration of the persona, and the harmonization of anima and animus. Life itself increasingly manifests as a dynamic laboratory for self-realization. Conflicts no longer appear as arbitrary misfortunes. They are interpreted as meaningful reflections of unintegrated aspects of the psyche demanding attention. Relationships, whether intimate, professional, or casual, serve as projections that illuminate both strengths and vulnerabilities. The individual begins to perceive the subtle interplay of inner and outer worlds, learning to act from the self rather than react from habitual ego patterns. Decision-making transforms from reactive impulsivity to informed intentionality, embodying the conscious collaboration between inner awareness and external circumstances. In this harmonized state, one navigates the complexities of life with grace, discernment, and clarity. Ultimately, Section 7 emphasizes that the self is not a static endpoint, but a living, evolving presence within the psyche. Its emergence is measured less by external achievement than by the depth of inner coherence, authenticity, and symbolic resonance experienced in daily life. Jung's vision of the self underscores that the journey is continuous. Each encounter with shadow, each dialogue with anima or animus, and each reflection on persona or dream imagery further refines and expands the self. Awareness, acceptance, and integration become ongoing practices, each reinforcing the understanding that wholeness is cultivated, not possessed. In this way, the self steadily guides the individual toward a state of alignment, coherence, and enduring psychological richness, harmonizing the multiplicity within and the world without. As the journey toward the self unfolds, one begins to notice a subtle yet profound shift in perception, a heightened awareness that life's events are not isolated incidents, but interconnected threads woven into a larger, meaningful tapestry. Carl Jung often emphasized that the self is both the orchestrator and the observer of this inner symphony, guiding consciousness toward integration without force or coercion. It is not an external authority, but an intrinsic, organizing presence within the psyche, quietly inviting the individual to reconcile the diverse and often conflicting facets of the inner world. This guidance manifests not as direct instruction, but as intuitive nudges, resonant symbols, and recurring motifs that gently draw attention to unresolved tensions and latent potentials. In this stage, the individual becomes increasingly attuned to the ways the inner self communicates, recognizing that every challenge, every encounter, and every insight is an opportunity for further alignment with wholeness. A key aspect of this phase is the deepening dialogue with the shadow. The shadow, once a source of fear, denial, or projection, now appears as a repository of untapped energy and undiscovered capacities. The individual begins to understand that ignoring or suppressing these hidden elements only prolongs fragmentation, whereas conscious engagement fosters growth and creativity. Through practices such as reflection, journaling, or active imagination, one confronts the shadow not as an enemy, but as a mirror of repressed or underdeveloped aspects of the psyche. This confrontation requires courage, humility, and honesty, for the shadow often reveals uncomfortable truths about motivations, desires, and fears. Yet, as these elements are acknowledged and integrated, they contribute vitality, authenticity, and depth to the individual's inner life, enriching both personal experience and interpersonal relationships. The persona, too, is continuously refined during this phase. Whereas earlier stages emphasized recognizing the protective function of social masks, the focus now shifts to differentiating between adaptation and authenticity. One becomes adept at wearing the persona when necessary, without allowing it to dominate, maintaining the integrity of the self beneath. Interactions with others are increasingly informed by the self rather than the performative ego, resulting in a natural, effortless authenticity. Social engagement transforms from a defensive or reactive stance into intentional, value-driven participation. This clarity allows the individual to navigate complex social landscapes with poise, using discernment to determine when to reveal or conceal aspects of the psyche, always with the self as the central organizing principle. Integration of the anima or animus intensifies in this stage, creating a fluid interplay between the inner masculine and feminine energies. These elements, once perceived as foreign or disruptive, now operate as internal allies, guiding emotional and rational responses in harmony. For men, engagement with the anima fosters greater empathy, creativity, and emotional resonance, while for women, integration of the animus cultivates assertiveness, decisiveness, and clarity of purpose. The union of these opposites does not erase individuality. Rather, it enriches it, providing balance, resilience, and adaptability. The psyche begins to function as a cohesive whole, where contradictions coexist without conflict, each aspect enhancing the other, contributing to a holistic sense of being. Symbolic imagery remains central to understanding and experiencing the self. Mandalas, with their concentric circles and intricate patterns, continue to serve as mirrors of psychic wholeness. Each layer, line, and color represents elements of the psyche in dialogue with one another, inviting contemplation and awareness. Creating or observing mandalas becomes a meditative practice, reinforcing the integration of shadow, persona, and animus. The center of the mandala symbolizes the self itself, a stable, harmonious point around which all other elements orbit. Engaging with these symbols fosters recognition of the self's continuity and presence, even amidst the flux of daily experience, reinforcing the understanding that wholeness is both internal and relational, personal and universal. Dreams further illuminate this journey, offering insights and guidance that the waking mind may overlook. In this stage, dream imagery often intertwines multiple archetypal symbols, reflecting the ongoing process of integration. One may encounter figures that represent fragmented aspects of the psyche, scenarios that mirror unresolved conflicts, or symbolic journeys that map the unfolding path toward wholeness. Engaging actively with these dreams, through journaling, visualization, or imaginative dialogue, enables conscious assimilation of unconscious material. Patterns emerge, revealing progress, persistent challenges, and latent opportunities for growth. The psyche's narratives, once opaque or confusing, begin to articulate the rhythm and structure of the self, providing a symbolic framework for conscious engagement with the unconscious. Ultimately, Section 8 emphasizes that alignment with the self is an experiential, ongoing process. It is characterized not by external accomplishments or accolades, but by a deepening coherence within the psyche and an expanding capacity for authentic, meaningful engagement with the world. The individual moves with increasing fluidity through life, responding from a place of centered awareness rather than reactive impulse. Awareness of the interconnectedness of inner and outer experiences fosters wisdom, compassion, and creative expression. The self emerges as both sanctuary and compass, offering stability amid uncertainty and clarity amid complexity, guiding the journey toward enduring integration and wholeness. As the path toward the self deepens, the awareness of life as a reflection of the inner world becomes more pronounced. Carl Jung emphasized that outer experiences are often mirrors of inner processes, and in this stage, the individual begins to perceive the subtle interplay between internal dynamics and external realities. The self, as the central organizing principle, fosters a capacity to observe life with clarity and equanimity, recognizing patterns, synchronicities, and lessons embedded in ordinary events. This perspective allows one to move through challenges not as arbitrary misfortunes, but as invitations to grow, integrate, and harmonize fragmented aspects of the psyche. Every interaction, every unexpected circumstance is seen as an opportunity to refine understanding, cultivate balance, and deepen the relationship with the self. The interplay with the shadow intensifies further, revealing layers of complexity previously unrecognized. As the self asserts its presence, The shadow no longer looms as an overwhelming, mysterious force. Instead, it presents as a repository of untapped creativity, courage, and emotional depth. Confronting and integrating these shadow elements requires not only self-awareness, but also a willingness to embrace discomfort and uncertainty. The individual gradually learns to approach the shadow with curiosity rather than fear, acknowledging that what once seemed threatening is often the source of energy and vitality when consciously embraced. These encounters foster resilience, emotional richness, and a profound sense of authenticity, reinforcing the understanding that the self encompasses all dimensions of the psyche, both light and dark. Persona dynamics continue to evolve in this stage. Whereas earlier engagement with social masks focused on recognizing their protective function, the emphasis now shifts toward conscious, flexible deployment. The individual gains insight into when to allow the persona to operate for adaptive purposes and when to step aside, letting the self guide interactions authentically. This refinement reduces the tension between inner and outer life, fostering coherence and integrity. Social engagement becomes a reflection of internal harmony, allowing the individual to navigate complex relational landscapes with confidence, discernment, and fluidity. The self serves as a grounding presence, ensuring that behavior aligns with core values and internal truth, rather than reactive impulses or societal pressures. Integration of the anima or animus reaches a pivotal point in this phase. Previously, these aspects functioned as guides or partial correctives to imbalances within the psyche, but now they operate in concert with other elements, forming a unified internal ecosystem. For men, deeper anima integration nurtures emotional intelligence, intuition, and relational sensitivity, while for women, the animus provides decisiveness, strategic insight, and assertive clarity. These energies no longer conflict with one another or with the ego. Rather, they enhance adaptive functioning and creative expression. The psyche becomes increasingly fluid, balancing rationality and emotion, introversion and extroversion, receptivity and action. The resulting harmony allows the self to manifest as a stable yet dynamic force, capable of sustaining complexity without fragmentation. Symbolic practices continue to serve as bridges to understanding the self. Mandalas, circular diagrams, and other sacred symbols offer visual representations of psychic wholeness, guiding attention toward balance, centrality, and integration. Engaging with these symbols through drawing, contemplation, or meditation provides a tangible framework for internal alignment, revealing how previously disconnected aspects, shadow, persona, anima, animus, can coexist in a coherent, harmonious structure. The center of the mandala represents the self, the stable core around which all other elements orbit. As the individual interacts with these symbols, the abstract concept of wholeness becomes experientially accessible, reinforcing the presence and authority of the self within everyday life. Dreams and imaginative exercises continue to illuminate pathways toward integration. Complex dream sequences often combine multiple archetypal figures, scenarios, and motifs, reflecting the ongoing interplay among psychic components. Engaging consciously with these dreams, through visualization, active imagination, or journaling, allows the individual to assimilate unconscious material, recognize recurring patterns, and resolve internal conflicts. Over time, the boundary between conscious understanding and unconscious insight becomes more permeable, enabling the self to operate as a guiding presence across both domains. This heightened integration fosters wisdom, emotional balance, and creative problem-solving, illustrating how the self functions not as a static endpoint, but as a living, evolving center of awareness. Ultimately, Section 9 emphasizes that the journey toward the self is a continual unfolding, characterized by progressive integration, heightened awareness, and authentic expression. The individual develops an enduring capacity to navigate life with composure, insight, and relational sensitivity, responding from the center of the psyche rather than reacting to external pressures or internal fragmentations. The self emerges as a source of coherence, vitality, and resilience, orchestrating the complex interplay of inner elements while supporting meaningful engagement with the outer world. Awareness of this internal harmony fosters a profound sense of freedom, purpose, and interconnectedness, affirming that the self is both the foundation of personal identity and the bridge to universal experience. The awareness of the self deepens as the individual becomes increasingly attuned to the rhythm and flow of life itself. At this stage, the self is no longer a distant ideal or abstract concept, but a palpable center from which perception, action, and reflection naturally emanate. Carl Jung described the self as the totality of the psyche, the organizing principle that harmonizes conscious and unconscious forces, integrating ego, shadow, persona, and anima, animus into a coherent whole. In practical terms, the self manifests as an inner authority that coordinates thought, feeling, and behavior, allowing one to move through life with clarity, intentionality, and a profound sense of alignment. Every decision, every interaction, and every creative endeavor begins to reflect the integrated presence of the self, even if the individual is not constantly consciously aware of it. The shadow continues to present both challenge and opportunity. What once provoked fear, shame, or denial is now approached with curiosity and acceptance. The individual recognizes that the shadow contains essential elements of personal power, creativity, and vitality that cannot be accessed through the ego alone. By engaging with these hidden aspects, the psyche expands its capacity for emotional depth, resilience, and adaptability. Jung emphasized that encountering the shadow is a prerequisite for encountering the self, as the unintegrated shadow perpetually fragments consciousness. In this stage, the self functions as a stabilizing center, allowing the individual to face internal darkness without losing composure, transforming formerly threatening material into sources of insight and energy. The persona, once a rigid social mask, now becomes an adaptable instrument of self-expression rather than a defensive barrier. Social interactions are informed by authenticity, but the individual is no longer enslaved by the need for approval or conformity. The self enables conscious deployment of the persona, allowing engagement with the external world to reflect inner coherence rather than anxiety or pretense. Relationships become arenas for mutual reflection and growth, rather than performances dictated by fear or social expectation. In essence, the self reconciles the tension between private inner life and public expression, fostering harmony, empathy, and confidence in navigating complex social landscapes. Anima and Animus dynamics reach a subtle but profound equilibrium. These internal counterparts, representing the psyche's opposite gendered qualities, are no longer sources of projection or imbalance, but integrated partners within the total self-system. For men, anima contributes intuitive insight, emotional intelligence, and relational sensitivity, while for women, animus provides assertive clarity, logical analysis, and confidence. The interplay of these energies becomes fluid and complementary, enriching creativity, decision-making, and interpersonal understanding. The self orchestrates these qualities seamlessly, ensuring that no aspect dominates unduly and that the individual experiences both inner harmony and the freedom to adapt to external circumstances. Symbolic engagement continues to illuminate the self's presence. Mandalas, sacred geometry, and circular motifs serve as external mirrors of internal integration. Drawing, meditating on, or simply observing these forms facilitates the recognition of patterns, cycles, and centers within the psyche. Each line, each symmetry, each concentric circle represents a component of psychic wholeness, reminding the individual that the self is not merely an idea, but an experiential reality that organizes inner life. These symbols provide tangible access to the otherwise abstract concept of the self, reinforcing understanding, guiding reflection, and inspiring continuous growth. Dreams and active imagination remain vital tools. Complex dream imagery now reflects an increasing alignment between conscious intention and unconscious processes. Archetypal motifs, previously confusing or alarming, are now interpretable as coherent expressions of the self's integration. Engaging with these inner narratives allows the individual to assimilate unresolved tensions, discover latent potential, and cultivate self-knowledge. The self becomes both observer and participant, providing guidance and coherence as the psyche navigates the often mysterious terrain of symbols, memories, and projections. Through this process, the boundary between conscious life and unconscious insight softens, allowing wisdom and creativity to flow more freely. By this stage, the individual recognizes that the self is not a fixed destination, but an evolving center of balance and insight. It organizes, integrates, and aligns all aspects of the psyche while remaining responsive to life's dynamic challenges. Ego, shadow, persona, and anima, animus are no longer fragmented or in opposition. Each element contributes to the larger harmony orchestrated by the self. Carl Jung's insight is clear. The self is both the innermost core of personal identity and the bridge to universal connection. This awareness fosters a profound sense of agency, freedom, and participation in life, revealing that true wholeness is not about perfection, but about embracing complexity, tension, and potential as part of an integrated whole. At this stage of the journey toward the self, the individual begins to notice the subtle yet profound shifts in perception that occur when one is increasingly aligned with inner wholeness. Carl Jung often emphasized that the self is not merely a psychological construct, but a living reality that shapes experience from within. It functions like a gravitational center, pulling disparate elements of consciousness into harmony and providing a consistent framework through which life can be understood. Suddenly, situations that once provoked confusion, anxiety, or conflict are met with discernment and equanimity. The individual's inner landscape reflects a balance between openness and stability, a balance nurtured by the continuous interplay of ego, shadow, persona, and anima, animus under the guiding presence of the self. The role of the ego evolves. Where the ego once acted as the sole driver of decision-making, motivated by survival, social validation, and personal ambition, it now assumes the role of a conscious steward, aware of its limitations and its potential when aligned with the self. The analogy of the car and driver comes to life. The ego may steer, but it does so within the broader context of the entire vehicle, feeling its wheels, suspension, and direction in relation to the road ahead. No longer the master of the psyche, the ego becomes a collaborator, capable of strategic decision-making without dominating or fragmenting the personality. It recognizes that true power is not control, but integration, and that the richness of life is revealed when each component of the psyche is respected and harmonized. Shadow work continues to deepen. The self allows for the direct confrontation with all that has been disowned or denied. Previously repressed impulses, suppressed emotions, and hidden motivations now emerge in consciousness as material to understand rather than obstacles to avoid. The self provides a sense of safety and perspective, enabling the individual to explore these dimensions without fear of being overwhelmed. By acknowledging and integrating the shadow, the psyche expands its capacity for empathy, authenticity, and creative problem-solving. The once feared parts of the self become sources of insight, revealing that what is often perceived as darkness carries the potential for growth, renewal, and wisdom. Persona integration now operates with nuance and flexibility. The masks one wears in society are no longer rigid defenses or distortions of identity, but intentional expressions of social adaptability that complement rather than conceal the true self. Interactions with others are informed by authenticity and sensitivity, recognizing the fluid boundary between personal integrity and social engagement. The self orchestrates this dynamic, allowing the individual to navigate relationships and social contexts with confidence, compassion, and discernment. There is a sense of playfulness in the persona, an ability to adjust without compromising the coherence of the self, much like an actor skillfully performing a role while remaining fully aware of the inner life beyond the stage. Anima and Animus integration reaches a profound stage of balance. The internal feminine within men and the internal masculine within women are no longer sources of conflict, projection, or longing. They are harmonized aspects of the self that provide intuition, strength, clarity, and empathy. The interplay of these energies allows for richer creativity, deeper relational understanding, and a more complete perception of reality. The self ensures that these qualities do not dominate the personality disproportionately, but contribute fluidly to the totality of conscious and unconscious life. The individual begins to embody a multidimensional presence, capable of perceiving both subtlety and structure, receptivity and assertiveness, intuition and logic. Symbolic consciousness remains central. Mandalas, sacred patterns, and circular motifs are not merely objects of contemplation, but reflections of internal integration. Each meditation, creation, or observation of these forms becomes an experiential bridge, connecting inner balance with outer perception. The self communicates through these symbolic forms, offering guidance, insight, and confirmation of growth. Dreams, visions, and spontaneous imagery continue to provide meaningful content, reflecting the ongoing alignment of inner and outer reality. Through these symbolic interactions, the self continually reminds the individual of the larger framework that organizes all aspects of life, both seen and unseen. In essence, this stage represents a deepening harmony. The self is now recognizable as a living, dynamic center. It is the compass within the psyche, the silent witness, and the orchestrator of wholeness. Carl Jung's teachings underscore that this is not an endpoint, but a continuum, an ongoing process of conscious engagement, reflection, and integration. The individual experiences life with increased clarity, intentionality, and compassion, understanding that wholeness is not perfection, but the ability to embrace complexity and transformation. Here, the journey toward self becomes less about achieving a distant ideal and more about living fully within the ongoing, evolving reality of one's integrated psyche. As the individual moves closer to the full realization of the self, there is a noticeable shift in perspective that touches every aspect of existence. Carl Jung described the self as the central organizing principle of the psyche, an inner nucleus that harmonizes conscious and unconscious life. Now, this principle begins to operate not only as a guide for personal growth, but as an intrinsic presence that colors perception, decision-making, and interaction with the external world. The experience is subtle yet profound. A sense of inner coherence emerges, a feeling that the disparate elements of the personality, once fragmented, conflicting, or hidden, are gradually being woven into a living, integrated tapestry. The ego's relationship with the self reaches maturity. Whereas the ego previously sought control and validation, now it functions with discernment and restraint. It is like a driver who knows the car not only from the steering wheel, but also through the resonance of the engine, the texture of the road, and the guidance of a compass embedded in the vehicle itself. The ego recognizes that true mastery lies not in dominance, but in partnership with the self. Decisions are no longer reactive, but informed by an internal sense of balance, by an awareness of the consequences that ripple through the mind, body, and relationships. The ego becomes attuned to the broader dynamics of life, embracing the interplay of freedom and responsibility, action and reflection. Shadow integration deepens at this stage, revealing layers of the unconscious that were previously inaccessible. Fears, insecurities, and disowned impulses emerge, not as threats, but as opportunities for understanding. The self provides the internal environment of safety and clarity necessary to meet these aspects without avoidance or denial. Carl Jung's insight was that the shadow contains vital energy and untapped potential. By engaging with it consciously, one gains access to creativity, resilience, and authentic self-expression. What was once a source of anxiety becomes a reservoir of insight, a foundation upon which the individual can construct a more unified and self-aware life. Persona and social adaptability now function with effortless fluidity. The masks worn in daily life are no longer defensive constructs imposed by fear or external expectation. They are conscious tools, reflective of a psyche that knows when to reveal and when to withhold, when to assert and when to yield. In this alignment, the individual interacts with the world without losing the integrity of inner life. Relationships gain depth and authenticity because the self's influence allows for genuine engagement without pretense. The social dimension becomes a mirror of internal harmony rather than a battlefield of conflicting demands. Integration of anima and animus reaches a refined equilibrium. The internal feminine and masculine aspects, once sources of tension, projection, or longing, are now fully recognized as complementary forces within the self. Their presence enriches perception, intuition, and emotional intelligence. Creativity, insight, and relational depth flourish because the psyche now has access to both receptive and active energies in balanced proportions. Decisions are informed by both rational clarity and intuitive wisdom. Action guided by inner discernment. The self ensures that neither energy overwhelms the other, resulting in a psyche that is fluid, adaptable, and complete. The symbolic language of the psyche, the mandalas, archetypal motifs, and recurring dream imagery becomes increasingly vivid and meaningful. These symbols act as touchstones, reflecting inner integration and offering guidance. Meditating on or creating such forms is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a direct interaction with the self, a dialogue between conscious awareness and the deeper organizing principle of the psyche. Jung emphasized that these symbols are universal, transcending culture and time, reminding the individual that the path toward wholeness is part of a larger, shared human experience. At this stage, the self reveals itself as the dynamic center of consciousness, both witness and participant, silent guide and active harmonizer. Life begins to feel more coherent, meaningful, and purposeful. The journey toward self is no longer a distant or abstract goal. It becomes a lived reality expressed in daily decisions, creative endeavors, and interpersonal interactions. The individual experiences the paradox of independence and connection, a simultaneous recognition of personal uniqueness and universal belonging. This is the essence of what Jung meant by the self, a state of totality, an ongoing, evolving wholeness that integrates all dimensions of being. As one steps into the final stages of awakening to the self, there is a profound awareness that life itself is a mirror reflecting the inner world. Carl Jung's insights become vividly alive. The self is not merely an idea or theoretical construct, but a living reality that shapes perception, choices, and meaning. The journey through ego, shadow, persona, and anima, animus has not been linear or easy, yet every confrontation, every encounter with resistance or discomfort has served a purpose. The psyche, once fragmented and reactive, begins to resonate with an inner order, a sense of unity that feels at once grounding and expansive. This stage is marked by the deepening of consciousness, where one recognizes that the self is both the observer and the orchestrator of internal life. The ego, now fully integrated, no longer struggles to assert itself over the unconscious. Instead, it collaborates, guided by the quiet authority of the self. There is a noticeable shift from compulsive striving to intentional living, a movement away from scattered attention toward sustained focus on what matters most. The individual experiences a clarity that transcends ordinary thought patterns, a knowing that emerges not from logic alone, but from the harmonious alignment of the entire psyche. Shadow work reaches its culminating point. What once provoked fear or avoidance now reveals itself as a source of vitality and insight. The previously hidden or suppressed aspects of personality, the anger, the vulnerability, the secret desires, are encountered with acceptance. In embracing these elements, the individual gains mastery over their inner landscape. There is no longer a battle to suppress or reject. Rather, the shadow becomes an essential companion, providing energy, creativity, and depth. Jung's perspective shines clearly. Integration of the shadow is not optional for those seeking wholeness. It is the doorway to the self. The persona is now worn consciously, deliberately, and with awareness of its function. The masks that once served to protect or deceive are understood as adaptive tools, flexible and intentional. Social interactions become acts of authentic expression rather than performances of survival. With the self as the guiding center, relationships are enriched with empathy, integrity, and genuine connection. The individual engages with others without losing the sense of inner wholeness, reflecting the balance of inner truth and external responsiveness. Anima and Animus reach their harmonious synthesis, revealing a profound balance between inner femininity and masculinity, receptivity and assertiveness. These forces are no longer sources of inner conflict or projection onto others. They are recognized as complementary aspects of the self. Creativity flows more freely, intuition becomes a reliable companion, and emotional understanding deepens. Decisions emerge from a space that combines logic, empathy, and instinct, a holistic intelligence that integrates all dimensions of being. The self, illuminated through mandalas and symbolic imagery, demonstrates its universality. Jung's emphasis on archetypes and cultural symbols is evident. Every mandala, circle, or sacred diagram encountered resonates with the individual's inner wholeness. These symbols are not mere decorations. They are reflections of the self's structure, maps that guide consciousness toward integration. They show that the journey to wholeness is not isolated or idiosyncratic. It is part of the shared human experience, transcending time, culture, and circumstance. At this ultimate stage, the self reveals its profound paradox. It is simultaneously the center and the periphery, the individual and the universal, the still point within the swirling energies of the psyche. Life is experienced with a sense of spaciousness, freedom, and responsibility. One feels both fully unique and fully connected, aware that personal growth is inseparable from the larger tapestry of existence. The self embodies the convergence of all that has been encountered, the ego's discernment, the shadow's energy, the persona's adaptability, and the anima-animus balance into a living, dynamic wholeness. The culmination of this journey is the realization that self-actualization is not an endpoint, but an ongoing process. The self is a continuous, evolving presence, always inviting deeper understanding, creativity, and compassion. Jung's teaching becomes a lived truth. Wholeness is achieved not by escaping parts of oneself, but by embracing, integrating, and harmonizing them. The individual now moves through life with authenticity, presence, and a quiet confidence that stems from alignment with the self. As we reach the close of this exploration into Carl Jung's concept of the self, it becomes clear that the journey is both profoundly personal and universally resonant. The self is not a destination to which one flees in order to escape the ego, the shadow, or the masks of persona. Rather, it is the recognition that all of these elements, light and dark, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, are integral parts of the same living whole. To awaken to the self is to awaken to one's own completeness, to see that every fragment of experience contributes to the greater tapestry of who we are. This awakening is often subtle, unfolding in quiet moments of reflection, in encounters that challenge our habitual patterns, and in the deep, sometimes uncomfortable awareness of inner contradictions. The self does not demand perfection. It calls for presence. It asks that we witness our fears without judgment, acknowledge our desires without shame, and honor our strengths without arrogance. In doing so, the psyche aligns, and a sense of inner coherence emerges. Life is no longer experienced as a series of fragmented events, but as a continuous flow in which each moment resonates with meaning and connection. The symbol of the mandala remains central to Jung's vision. In its perfect circularity, the mandala mirrors the structure of the self, a convergence point where opposites meet and integrate. It reminds us that the journey to wholeness is not linear, but cyclical, reflective, and ongoing. Every encounter with the inner world, every confrontation with the shadow, every peeling away of the persona, every reconciliation with the anima or animus is a movement toward the center, toward the core where authenticity resides. And as with all circles, there is no true end. The path of integration is infinite, inviting continuous discovery and growth. To embrace the self is to recognize one's dual reality, the individuality that allows for personal expression and choice, and the interconnectedness that binds us to the universe. In this space, life is lived with clarity, compassion, and purpose. Decisions are guided by a holistic intelligence that balances rational thought, emotional wisdom, and intuitive insight. Relationships deepen as the individual no longer projects unmet needs or fears onto others, but engages with presence and understanding. Creativity flourishes as energy previously spent in internal conflict is now available for constructive expression. Ultimately, Jung's teaching on the self offers a call to transformation that transcends culture, era, and circumstance. The self is a living invitation to see ourselves fully, to honor the totality of our inner landscape, and to move through the world with integrity and authenticity. It is a reminder that wholeness is not achieved by rejecting parts of ourselves, but by integrating them, by embracing the fullness of what it means to be human. Just as every mandala leads the eye to its center, so too does the journey into the self lead consciousness to the quiet, luminous core within. Here, one is both a singular individual and a living expression of the universe, aware that true enlightenment is not an escape, but a coming home. And in that sacred space, we find the self, not as a distant ideal, but as the very essence of our being, whole, awake, and eternally alive.